Okay, so let's continue here. We're up to on Yudal and Amid Beis. Well, we left over a small piece where this is basically the Gemara says the same thing as before, but in a little bit different way. So it's really the same as before. So it says like this. Let's just say how it goes. It says like this. Ameimar. V'iteimor Rab Shisha berei Rab Idi masni hocha. Either this is Ameimar, or some say Rab Shisha berei Idi. They learned it this way. They had a different way, the same idea, but this is what they say. So the way they said it like this. Omar Shmuel says, Katan muter legalchoi b'moyed. The opposite of what we said before. The way they have it written, that Shmuel said, a minor, a baby, you are allowed to cut his hair during Chol HaMoed. Now, he says, it makes no difference whether he was born before Yom Tov or born on Chol HaMoed. Lo yishno noilad b'moyed, v'lo yishno noilad me'ikora. It makes no difference whether he was born from before Yom Tov. Now, sometimes you would say that if he was born before Yom Tov, then why should we allow him to take the haircut on Yom Tov itself? He should have taken the haircut, you should have cut his hair from before Yom Tov. He says, no, it doesn't make a difference. Since it's a minor, it's a baby, in this case, it doesn't make a difference if it was born right on Chol HaMoed. So that's like somebody who was in prison. In this case, the baby was in the mother's womb. Couldn't give him a haircut over there. It doesn't make a difference. Even though he was born before, we're not going to apply the prohibition against taking a haircut to newborns. Omar HaPinchas says that HaPinchas, oh, afanan nami tanino. We actually have a proof from that, from the Mishnah. This is just the opposite the way the Gemara presented it before. The Gemara presented before that Shmuel said that you're not allowed to. And the Gemara asked a question from this Mishnah. Now the Gemara is presenting it that Shmuel said it's okay. And the Gemara is presenting this Mishnah as an evidence to what he says. Yeah, hello? No. I'm just in the middle of class here. Okay, I'm sorry. So he says that we also learned this in a Mishnah. Because the Mishnah says the Gemara is trying to prove this halacha that a cotton you can cut his hair even if he was born from before Yom Tov. Omar HaPinchas afanonam itanina. We also learned so. Because the Mishnah says like this: Kol elu shem amru mutar legaleach b'moyed. All those that we allow them to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. We talked about somebody who comes out of prison. We talked about somebody who comes from overseas. The various situation in which the rabbis allowed the person to take a haircut during Chol HaMoed, mutar legaleach b'mei evloi. So that same person, under these circumstances, if he is in mourning, it's the day of his mourning, he's sitting Shiva, so still you are allowed to cut off the hair during the days of the mourning. Zog the Gemara, ho, asurim legaleach b'moyed. But if it's a situation, so that's what it says in the Mishnah. So if you're not allowed to, if you're allowed to cut the hair on Chol HaMoed, you can certainly, in the days of mourning, you can also cut the hair. So the Gemara wants to derive, so we can derive that if we prohibit them from taking a haircut on Chol HaMoed, then asurim legaleach b'mei evlei. The Gemara thinks that we could derive this from it, because if you're allowed to do Chol HaMoed, you can do during Avelis. If you're not allowed to cut during Moed, you're not allowed to do during Avelis.
What is the connection between Avelis? One is a question of work, and one is a question of Avelis. I mean, how are they connected?
Yeah, that's good question. But the thing is, what Beis Din is taking into consideration the emergency, basically, of the necessity of it. If Beis Din sees that we're going to, the necessity allows to make an exception, even though over there we're talking about malacha, then Beis Din will also use that same exception when mourning, even though mourning is something else. It's just that Beis Din recognizes that this is an important case, and just like we make an allowance and we figure that that's more important, we're also going to make the allowance over there too. The connection between them is because a lot of these laws are based on how the rabbis decided. This is not something that we're learning from a pasuk, but this is given over to the rabbis to use their discretion, how they think it should be. And if we allow it during the Chol HaMoed, we're going to allow it also on mourning. And the Gemara thinks that we should learn, but if you're not allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed, then you're not allowed to do it on the mourning. So if we should accept this extension, that what's not allowed is not allowed. See, the Mishnah only says what is allowed there. It doesn't say what is not allowed is not allowed. But the Gemara is trying to say on its own, since what's permissible on Chol HaMoed is permissible on mourning, so we're going to follow this, that what is prohibited on Chol HaMoed is prohibited on mourning. So that means that if we're going to prohibit a cutting of the hair of a child that was born before Yom Tov, then it means that you're going to prohibit him also from cutting his hair during his mourning. And how could we say something like that when mourning doesn't apply to a child at all? So that would mean, the Gemara is trying to think, that would mean that we allow the Katan. That would prove that we allow the Katan, the minor, to cut his hair, because otherwise we would not be allowed to cut it on the days of mourning, and that's not true, because we know that a Katan has no mourning. That's what the Gemara is trying to bring, that we have this proof. So okay. Amrit Katan Asur, but if you're going to say that a minor is prohibited, a minor that was born before but is prohibited to cut his hair during Chol HaMoed, Nimtzas Avelus Neheges Bekotten, then it turns out that you have the level of mourning applying to a minor, because you're not going to let him cut the minor's hair during his mourning. He applies mourning. But we know very clearly that there is no mourning for a minor, because we learned in Abraisa, even though Mekarin Lekot Mipnei Agmas Nefesh, that we're going to render the garment of a minor, because that brings about, people feel the pain or the upset, because here you have a little kid walking around with a kriya, with a rendering of the garments. So that's why we say that you do it, you render the garment of a minor, but not that there is really Avelus. So the Gemara thinks so that should prove that a minor is allowed to cut his hair. You're allowed to cut the hair of a minor on Chalamoyed, even if it was born, even if he was born before, because otherwise it would mean that he would be mourning on because we equated to. What I said, it's not a problem, but not a proof, because Mikotoni, because it doesn't say Ho Asuri. It doesn't say that. It just says if it's permissible, it's permissible. It doesn't say could be. If it's asur, it could be, might be asur, might be not. Dilma yeshmem asur, yeshmem mutar. Some are prohibited, some are permissible. And therefore, even if you were going to say that the cut, you're not allowed to cut his hair, but it still could be permissible. Avelus, you can do by Avelus because you don't have, that's very clear. That's not really the way to derive it. So we don't have a proof. Basically, we don't have a proof of that Mishnah. It depends really which version you go by. Shmuel in this version says you're allowed to. And in the previous version that we had in the previous page, he says you're not allowed. Okay, that takes care of this. Now we have a new question. A person who is excommunicated. A person who is excommunicated has various different conducts that he has to conduct himself as one who has been excommunicated. And the question is, does the holiday push it off? In other words, because of the Yom Tov, we're going to not apply the laws. You're not allowed to sit in this. You're not, there's different things. A person who's excommunicated. But the Gemara wants to know during the Chol HaMoyed, or actually not Chol HaMoyed, during the entire Yom Tov, the Gemara wants to know, does the excommunication apply during Yom Tov? So Omer Rabbi Yosef says, Rabbi Yosef Toshma. Come, I'll prove to you. I'll come and we'll see. I'll prove to you that you do conduct yourself with the excommunication during the holidays. So what does it say? Because we learned in the Mishnah, it says like this: Donim dine nefoshes v'dine makris v'dine mamoinus. During Chol HaMoyed, we will sit in court in capital cases, with meaning to figure out whether the person gets the death penalty or not for killing somebody else, or the laws, whether he gets lashes or not, or also monetary cases, dine nefoshes, dine makris, v'dine mamoinus. But this is in Chol HaMoyed, not on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, we don't do that. Zokt Rashi, done in Din Nefoshes, b'moyed. That is during Chol HaMoyed. Avaloi b'Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, you don't do this. Sha'osur mishum shvus. Because that would be a prohibition. Midrabanan, we don't do court cases on Yom Tov. Okay. So what does the Gemara want to prove from here? So why are we going to take him to court on Chol HaMoyed? Seems like that we're going to rule what the ruling is during Chol HaMoyed. So the Gemara derives from it. Since you're saying that we're going to take up the case during Chol HaMoyed, miklal, so we can derive the Eloi Tzayis, that if he's not going to listen, like if Beis Din rules and they don't want to listen, Nami misham tinan le'b'moyed. So during Chol HaMoyed, we're going to excommunicate him. Because what's the purpose of sitting to judge? The Gemara thinks now we're probably going through the whole court process. So what happens in court when you don't listen to the court? So then the court excommunicates him. So that means that on Chol HaMoyed, you can excommunicate. The Eloit Sayis Dina. If he won't listen to the Beis Din, what they rule, you said that they're sitting in judgment on Chol HaMoyed. And what happens if he doesn't listen? Mishamtinulay will excommunicate him. So the Gemara is saying, if we're even excommunicate him on, and here you want us to say that he has already been excommunicated, we shouldn't apply it into Yom Tov. So if he's not going to apply it into Yom Tov, how could we excommunicate? Frag the Gemara. If it enters your mind that he will not conduct himself, the one who was excommunicated, will not conduct himself in his excommunication during the Yom Tov, if he has been already excommunicated and he came from before, you're going to say, Osi regel dochilon. Comes the Yom Tov, pushes it away. If we're going to assume that he doesn't apply the excommunication, conduct himself in the Yom Tov. Osi regel v'dochile, what means, what does the Yom Tov do? She'ein noyeg niduye beregel. That he doesn't conduct his excommunication during the Yom Tov. So hashto mishamtinan le'anan. So now we're going to go ahead and excommunicate him if it doesn't apply from before. So what's the point in the Beis Din sitting down to the court when they won't be able to excommunicate him? Because if we're going to say that you don't excommunicate him from before, how are we going to excommunicate him now? So that should mean that we do excommunicate, that we do conduct with excommunication. That's why he's taken to court. And if you're going to excommunicate it, excommunicate it. But how do we jump? What's this extension? If we're going to judge him and we're going to take him to court, does that really mean that we're going to excommunicate him too? Maybe we're just taking him to court to see what to be done, but the actual excommunication is going to take place after Yom Tov. Who says just because we say that you could go ahead and judge them on Chol HaMoyed, doesn't really mean that we're going to actually excommunicate him. Amle Abaye. So Abaye says, maybe all what we're talking about, we're going to sit in the court, is just to look into the case, to the law, to find out what should be done. Rashi, Dilma Liyuni. Oh, the Tony did Daninon, this that we say that we judge. Lo Yamrinon, we don't say Dilmo ish ploini chayiv, ish ploini zakai. Maybe we're not going to come to a decision. This person is guilty. This person is vindicated. No, maybe we're not going to do that. What does it mean that we come to court? Because in that case, you're going to learn it. Then you are deriving the Eloit Sayis. If he doesn't listen, then we're going to excommunicate him. But that's not what it means that we're going to court. What it means here, we're just looking into the case. We're not going to tell him you're innocent, you're not innocent. We're just looking, because if we should tell him that he's guilty and he doesn't want to listen, then we'll have to excommunicate him, apparently. That second step we'll have to follow. But here, we're not even going to get to that step, because we're not going to say innocent or not. That will wait for after Yom Tov. And he actually says, I'll prove you that that's what you do. Because how are you going to explain what you say that you judge in the capital cases? How are you going to explain over there? If you don't say such, which means you're not going to say it's just to look into the case without coming to the resolution, without the ruling. The Katan. So here, when it says that we are judging capital cases, are you going to say that you're actually going to kill him on Chol HaMoed? You're going to look in, if you're going to actually rule, you're not just going to look into the case, but you're going to pass out the ruling. You're going to tell us the law. So how could we say that about capital case? That means that you're going to kill the person because, but the Gemara says, if you need to kill somebody during Chol HaMoed, that would hold them back from the joy of Yom Tov, because whenever Beis Din did the death penalty, Beis Din didn't eat all that day. So if we're going to say that during Chol HaMoed, Beis Din is going to conclude the law, and Beis Din is going to put the person to death, and therefore they're not going to be able to eat. So by allowing to do the case on Chol HaMoed, you're going to be ruining the Simchas Yom Tov.
Certainly for the guy who's going to be killed.
Seems like a not such a strong argument. Here you're killing somebody, and you're saying, well, they're not going to have Simchas Yom Tov. No, he has to be put to death regardless. So what's the point? The Tanya, so the Gemara brings up Raisa where it says that when Beis Din put somebody to death, they didn't eat that whole day. The Tanya, we learned in the Raisa, Rabbi Kiva says, where do we know the halacha that when the Sanhedrin kills someone, they kill the soul, they won't taste any food, they won't eat all the day. Talmud Loimar, they learn it from the pasuk V'ikra Yutes. Over there, from this pasuk, we learn a lot of different things. But one of the things we learn, Lo yisaychlu al hadom. You can't eat if you have blood on your hands. If you just killed somebody, you can't eat. Basically, you have to fast on that day. Lo yisaychlu al hadom. That's one interpretation of the verse. So therefore, they're not going to be able to eat. So you're going to take away Sudas Yom Tov. So how could you say that you put judgment on Chol HaMoed, we're going to deal capital cases? So it must mean that you're not going to rule on them. Or what you're going to do is you're going to look into it. Elo liyune b'dinei. It's just going to be to look into the case. So therefore, ochinami liyune b'dinei. So here, when we're talking about monetary cases, in which normally you would put them into excommunication, no, we won't do that because we're not saying anyone is guilty or anyone is innocent. We're just looking into the case. And after Yom Tov, we'll have to deal with it. But we're not doing the case. That's what the Gemara says. Therefore, the Gemara wants to bring a proof that it doesn't mean, maybe it doesn't mean that you're going to excommunicate him on Yom Tov. All what it means is that you're going to look into the law on Yom Tov, just like we have to say it with regards to monetary cases. Friday Gemara, if that is the case, that they're just going to look into and they're going to know what the halacha, they're just not going to tell the other person. And they're not going to kill him because they're not going to tell him. But that would be not right either. There is a law that you're not allowed to torture the law. When torture the law means if you know what the ruling is, you must say it right away. You can't keep the other person guessing what's the decision. The guy needs to know he's going to be put to death or not. He doesn't want to be surprised. That's called Inui Hadin. You can't. So he answers back to him, if you are saying we're just looking into the judgment, but we won't tell him and we won't kill him, but that way the guy is going to have to wait for his verdict till when? Till after the Yom Tov. Beis Din knows already the verdict in Chol Hamoed, but you don't want to tell him the verdict because you don't want to kill him the damn day, and you don't want to disrupt the Beis Din from the Simchas Yom Tov. So he says to him, he argues him, Cain, if that's the case, that you are just looking into the halacha. So that would not be proper. Im Cain nimtzas ma'ane as dinner. So it turns out that you are torturing the law here. Ma'ane as dinner. Sagt Rashi, dichi loy amru lei dinner alter. If they don't tell him what the law is immediately, the ainubei that they're looking into it, havelei inui hadin. That becomes torturing the law. And therefore, we have to say that they're actually going to convict him on that day. But you're saying, how could they convict him on that day? They're not going to eat. They're going to take away the Yom Tov. No, they're going to enjoy the whole day's meal. Just before the nighttime, they're going to say, "Oh, this guy has to get killed," and then they enjoyed all the meal anyways. Elo, that's what the Rashi says. La'ilam donim dinoi. Really, what it means is, as the simple meaning is, we judge his case. We mamesh b'mayed, and we actually completed on the Chol Hamoed. And therefore, the so this is talking about by other cases, by monetary cases, if he doesn't. And we could learn from him, and if he doesn't listen, we will excommunicate him. And therefore, there is no reason not to lift the excommunication. And you can learn from here that the excommunication applies during Yom Tov, because we see you're going to judge him, and it's going to be and your argument is, by the capital cases, Beis Din is going to lose out, be prevented from the joy of Yom Tov. What are we dealing with? The Osum Mitzafrochu. The Gemara says, Osum Mitzafra, they start in the morning, they look into his case. They go up, they eat, and they drink all day. They have Sudas Yom Tov. They come back at sunset. They conclude the judge, the case, and they kill him. So it's all done during Yom Tov. So we don't have any evidence to prove that the menuda would take it away. On the contrary, we judge and we do it, and we put him into excommunication, so everything applies. Amar Abaye, Tashma, I'll bring you another person, because it says in the Brisa, it says umenuda shehitiru loy chachomim. This is talking about during the festival, that who is the one that is allowed to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed, we learned before, is one who was excommunicated, and then he was allowed by the Chachamim. So the fact that he was allowed by the Chachamim seems like the laws of Nidui applied to him. Why did the Chachamim have to allow him? So it must be that we do apply the laws of Nidui. Toshma, it says in the Mishnah, Menuda Shitiru Chachamim, he's allowed to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed. Toshma Nuda Shitiru Loy Chachamim Kasal Kadaituch. It enters our mind. Hitiru L'chol Niduya Beregel. He thinks that this is all the time. Rashi says that whenever there's a menuda, not him, but there's always a law that if you are a menuda, it doesn't apply. Menuda, it says sheitiru lechachamim. It's not something happened over here that the chacham allowed him, but menuda the chachamim allowed, as the Gemara thinks, what it means is that it's an allowance for an excommunicated person during Yom Tov. It doesn't apply to him, so he can go ahead and take a haircut. So that means that it doesn't apply. The Gemara says no. We're talking about a specific place. Miketona shehiti ru chachamim doesn't say that the chachamim made an allowance for cholamoyed. Shehitiru loy chachamim ketona. It's talking about they specifically for this person they allowed him. Why? It's talking about he went and he appeased the person that he had to find. The reason why they put him in to excommunication is because he didn't obey the ruling of Pesach. But when if he went and he appeased them, agreed about the event, and he did it, so in that case they allowed it for that particular person. And Oslo Paisel Baldine Benegel, and what means the Chomim allowed him is based in Shoyvoisador. It's not generally for Chalamoyed, but the best of that generation allowed it to him, the sages in that place. And then he came before the rabbis and they permitted, so that would be the other case where he's permitted. Okay, so Gemara says things that the excommunication applies to him. The exception is if he appeased them, and then the rabbis will allow him to take a haircut on Cholamayit. Next, the Gemara says, Mitzoira Mahu She Yanik Tzoraita Beregel. Is a Mitzoira one who has with leprosies. Now, leprosies is not allowed to come into the machane, to the camp, and also is not allowed to shear. So the question is, what happens on Yom Tov? Is there an allowance for a Mitzoya? Mitzoya Mahu Sheyanhig Tzoraita Beregel. Should he conduct his leprosy during the Yom Tov? Sheyanhig Tzoraita, what does it mean? How is he going to conduct his tzoras? He shouldn't come inside the camp, and he shouldn't take a haircut. Should it apply to the Yom Tov as well? So Amar Abaye says, Abaye Toshma. Common list in the Mishnah when it talks about the allowances from the people that could take a haircut in Cholamoyed, it says Nozir v'amitzoira, the Nozir, and it says, and the Mitzoira, mitumosei letaharosei. When he switches, that instead of staying Tomei, he becomes Toyer, that's when he can go ahead and take a haircut. Hobby made tumosei. But if he's Tomei, when he's still a Mitzoira, no, then he should not be taking a haircut. So it's implied from the Mishnah that only when he switches from the Tare, from Tuma to Tare, but not if he's still a Mitzoira. And he should continue with the laws of Tzaraz and Regel. And the Gemara says, no, it's not approved. Why? Because really, why the Mishnah is saying it, loy mi boyi be made to mosed loy. Perhaps it goes without saying that during the day that he's tummy, that for sure it doesn't apply the laws of haircutting. But if we're talking about that he's becoming now tahir, maybe nigzer shemo yasher karbonoisov. Maybe we shouldn't allow him to take a haircut now. Why? Because so what are we afraid? Zoklashi nigzer, let us worry that shemo yasher karbonoisov, that he may delay bringing the sacrifices. Zoklashi nigzer, there will be a thought that when he switches from the Tumah to the Tara, we should say that he should not be able to make a haircut because he might delay the Korbanos. Rashi, Nigzer shelo yigalech b'mayit. We should make it galer. The kiv on the gila tzarich lahavi korban. Because once he shaves, there is a obligation to bring a korban. So v'shemo mashe korbanesov, he might delay the korbanes ad liyom tov ha'achron, and he's going to delay the korbanes until the last day Yom Tov, and umekrarvon, and he makrivon, and he's going to bring him on the last day Yom Tov. Va'osu lahakriv korbanes yachid b'Yom Tov, and you're not allowed to bring korbanos of an individual on Yom Tov. So he would be violating because he's going to bring the korban on Yom Tov. So there might be a separate issue, Kamash Malon. So he says no, that even if you change from Tumah to Tara, we don't worry, he could take a haircut. And we're not going to worry that he's going to bring the korban, he's going to leave it for the last day Yom Tov, and he's going to bring it on Yom Tov, which he's not allowed to, but he can go and cut his hair. But you don't have evidence from the Mishnah that during the May Tahar and Tumah that it applies. Maybe he could take a haircut because we don't apply the tzaras during Yom Tov. Omar Rava. So Rava says, Tashma, I'll bring you another proof, because the pasuk says, "Va'atzarua," the Rabbi's Kohen Gadol. So the pasuk says, so that means the Rabbi's Kohen Gadol, that if there is a tzoras, if there's leprosy, it would also apply to a Kohen Gadol. The Rabbi's Kohen Gadol shenoeg b'tzaras. One may think a Kohen Gadol doesn't have tzaras. Even a Kohen Gadol has tzaras. The laws of tzaras apply to the high priest. So the Gemara says like this: Kohen Gadol, the Chol Hashona Keregel L'Kula Al Medomi. The Kohen Gadol, all year, by him, every day is considered like a festival. In other words, we have a Yom Tov when Yom Tov comes around, but the Yom Tov for a Kohen Gadol is all year round. It's like a Yom Tov. The Gemara wants to say, we'll see in a minute what it means. The Gemara wants to say, since tzaras applies to a Kohen Gadol all year round, tzaras applies to everyone during Yom Tov. Because since tzaras applies to a Kohen Gadol, If tzaras applies to a Kohen Gadol, then it applies to us all the time. Let's look at Rashi. Well, Kohen Gadol the Chol Hashana Keregel L'Kula Almadami. A Kohen Gadol all year round, it's considered like a Yom Tov for everybody else. In what way? The Gemara is going to say, because the Tanan, I'll skip the Rashi for a minute, because we see Kohen Gadol Makriv Oinon, that a Kohen Gadol can bring an offering while he is an Oinon, meaning while he loses a family member that he has to mourn. So normally, in the first day, you're an Oinon, you don't bring a korban. But a Kohen Gadol is exempt from it. Ein Oichel means he doesn't eat the korban, but he brings it a korban. How come he can bring a korban? But on Yom Tov, a person can send a korban even if he's an oinon. So since we see that it applies tzaras to the Kohen Gadol, let's do the Rashi. It's like this: How Kohen Gadol kol hashana l'didei keregel l'kula al medami. By the Kohen Gadol all year, the Kohen Gadol, it's like a Yom Tov for everybody else. Where do we see this, that he's treated like by Yom Tov? The Tanan Kohen Gadol Makriv Oinon. We, an ordinary person, is not allowed to be Makriv and Oinon, only by Regel. But a Kohen Gadol, any day of the year, can bring a korban while he's an Oinon. An Oinon means in the day that he lost one of the people that he has to mourn for. So, Mid'omer Aaron leMoshe, because the pasuk says Aaron was arguing to Moshe, and Moshe was asking him, how come it didn't eat the korban? So he says, "V'chalti chatus hayoim." He says, if I've eaten it today, would Hashem approve? Because he was an oinen. But v'lo yomar leMoshe v'yikrafti. He didn't say if I brought the korban. That was the problem. Miklal, da krava ba'aninus, that you could, a Kohen Gadol could bring a korbaninus. Can't eat. Makriv oinim ein oichel, but he can't. V'lomadno, and we learned the Kohen Gadol makriv oinim. Kohen Gadol can bring an oinim. Avo kulalmo, but everybody else, b'shari yimos hashana, during the rest of the year, oinim einim mishalech korbanosim, but oinim does not send his korbanos. Kedamrina lekamon daf tezvov omid beis. We learn in Shlomim, Bizman Shehu Sholem, we call him a Shlomim. That's when he's whole. The Loi Bizman Shehu Oinen, but not in the time when he's an Oinen. But on the other hand, Uberegel, but when it comes to Yom Tov, Mishaleach, then he could send. And so we see that Yom Tov by a person is the same level as a weekday by the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol, Oinen, Makriv Kol Hashana. A Yid, an Oinen, can only do it on the Regel. Kohen Gadol can bring it all year. Alma Kol Hashana L'Didei Keregel Domi. So a Kohen is like a Yom Tov all year. He can bring a korban. And still the Katani Denayig Beit Saras. And it says that leprosy applies to it. Tifshoit, so from this you can resolve that every mitzvah applies during the Yom Tov. The Tanah, Kohen Gadol Makriv Oinen Ve'eina Eichel. So we see that he can bring an Oinen, it means. So that means Kol Hashana Keregel. And still we say Va'atzarua, the Rabbi's Kohen Gadol. So we see that the tzaras applies to the regel. Zog the Gemara, Shema Mino, we have a good proof. Okay, let's go weiter. Another piece. So basically, the Gemara says, since a Kohen Gadol has leprosy, that means that leprosy applies to all of us during Yom Tov. Why? Because what applies to the Kohen Gadol applies to Yom Tov, because the exemption of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Tov by Yom Tov is like the Kohen Gadol all year. So we have to look at what happens to the Kohen Gadol. If the Kohen Gadol has leprosy, then by Yom Tov by us we have noyeg, the letzaras. Further, the Gemara says, Ovel, a mourner, Osur b'tispoidus, is not allowed to take a haircut. Can't take a haircut, a mourner. Where do we learn this from? That you're not allowed to cut your hair when you're mourning. Because the Torah, the merciful one, Hashem says to the Bnei Aaron, in Vayikra Yud, Roshechem al tifro, that you don't let your hair grow wild. Grow wild means not having a haircut. That means that was when the Bnei Aaron, when they lost their brothers, they died over there. So he told them, don't let your hair grow wild, which means go without giving a haircut. But we can learn that this is specifically because they're Bnei Aaron. Miklal, from this we can derive the kulal ma'asur, that for everybody else, it is prohibited to cut their hair. Further, the Gemara asks, Omid Beis, we changed to Tazvav Amad Aleph, I'm sorry, 15 side A, Menudin u'mitzoiroi. People who are excommunicated and they have leprosy, mahen b'tispoidus. Are they allowed to take haircuts? We learned before that their laws apply on Chol HaMoed, but we haven't learned specifically, is a person that is excommunicated or a person who's a mitzoira, are they permitted to take a haircut, or that's prohibited to them? Menudim u'mitzoraim mahu. So the Gemara, so why are we asking them together? Because they're resolved together. Why is they asking together, even though these are two separate cases? But the answer comes together as he asks them together. Tashma, come and listen. It says menudim u'mitzoraim asurim lachapis, that menudim and mitzaroyim are prohibited l'saper or l'chapis. They can't take haircuts and they can't wash their clothes. So here you have it that they're not allowed to. A menudim and mitzaroyim is not allowed to cut his hair, and also not allowed to wash their clothes. Further, the Mishnah says, this is the end of that Mishnah. Menuda shemeis, a person who was excommunicated and he dies, based in circling. So based in would stone the coffin of the excommunicated person. They would stone it. Menuda shemeis chulu, safe at the Braisa, at the end of the Braisa. Rabbi Yehuda says, we are not intending over here to place such a heap of stone as the heap they did by Ocham. We read in the Tanakh in Yeshua Zion, Kigalu Shel Ocham, the Ksiv, it says Yeshua Zion by Yakimu Olam Gal Avonim Vadu, they placed upon him a large heap of stone. So we don't mean to stone him and put such a heap. Ella Bezdin Sholchin Bezdin would send Manichin Evan Gedoyla Ala Reinoy. They would put a large stone on the corner. The Lamdoch to teach you. Shekolam is Nada Umeis Beniduyo. Anybody who has been excommunicated and he died in his excommunication, meaning he hasn't resolved it before his death, Bezdin Soiklinas Aroinoi, Bezdin would stone the coffin. Okay. What further talks about laws of mourning. So the Gemara Ovel Chayiv Ba'atifas Harosh. You know what? Let's leave this over. We'll leave this over for next time. We'll stop over here. Just share a word. Today is Rosh Chodesh. And first of all, I wanted to dedicate our learning today is the yahrzeit of a young man, actually a bacher who's 17 years old, passed away in the prime of his life, medical condition. Today is the first yahrzeit. Shalom Dov Ber, Ben Shner Zaman, and Miriam. And so the Neshama should have an aliyah and be a good better. And today being it's the beginning of the month of Elul, and Elul is considered the Chodesh HaRachamim, the month of compassion, because on this month, leading up to Yom Kippur, Moshe was up on the mountain and he prayed to Hashem. Hashem forgave them, and it's called Chodesh HaRachamim. We blow the shofar, we say L'Dov Hashem Ori, we say, but it's a time to improve. And the Alter Rebbe speaks about that the king is in the field. It's an opportunity while the king is in the palace, Rosh Hashanah. Over there, in order to get into the palace, you need to be worthy. You need to be good reason to get there. But in the field, everybody, Hashem's 13 attributes of mercy are revealed, and we have the opportunity. Everybody can approach the king, and everybody will be accepted. Hashem shows everybody a smiling face, shows them a good countenance, and accepts us all. This is all in preparation for the Rosh Hashanah, for the new year. The month of Elul is the month of Cheshbon, the month of accounting, of taking stock of the entire year. And the word of Elul is Ani ledoidi v'doidi li. You turn to Hashem, and then Hashem turns to you. So that's a very important time. Today is the first day. It's now this second day of Rosh Chodesh, the Aleph Elul. So Hashem should help us that we should prepare and make up for everything that needs to be made up, prepare ourselves for the future. And Hashem will bless us, especially in the situation in the Holy Land, and to protect us and send us protection, and avenge the blood of those who were murdered in cold blood. And hopefully we will not have to experience any more such situation. We'll have only happiness, health, salvation, and the Jewish people will be able to live in peace and security, the Holy Land, and Kol Mashiach Tzidkenu Imheir V'Yameinu. Okay, this concludes our class for today. Hope we learned something a little bit. Wish everybody a good week. See everybody in Mr. Shem next week. Same time, same station.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Say goodbye. Bye, everyone.
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.